Hi, I'm Bridget. Welcome to my kitchen. Do you love baking with fresh fall apples? I get so excited when local apples arrive in the markets. That's when they taste the best, I think. They're crisp, they're flavorful, and they're just right for these two recipes that I'm sharing today. The first is a simple apple crisp, classic apple crisp, that really showcases the flavor and the texture of fresh fall apples. And the second is the easiest apple pie ever. It's a crustless apple pie, and it's so simple to put together. First, the apple crisp. This is one of the simplest desserts going. And the ingredients are so simple and so good. Lots of fresh apples, flour, butter, rolled oats, a little cinnamon, and I like to add a little molasses to my apple crisp because it gives the sauce that forms while it's cooking a rich caramel flavor. Let's start with the filling. We'll use between 6 and 8 apples, whatever it takes to fill my casserole dish, and I like to use a nice deep casserole. Now my apples are a variety of sizes, so what I'm going to do is just keep peeling and slicing until I have enough in my dish. I love to use a vegetable peeler to peel my apples because it's quick, but also I don't lose too much of the flesh of the apple. I've got a combination of apples here. I've got Macintosh apples and Paula Reds, and they'll contribute different flavors to this apple crisp, but different textures as well. So there's 6 apples. I'll just start slicing them off the core, and we'll see if that's enough to fill my casserole. Now I'm not slicing them too thin because this is going to bake for the better part of an hour, so they will have lots of time to soften. Fall apples are usually pretty juicy, so they create a really beautiful sauce in this apple crisp. Now my dish is almost full, but these apples, of course, will reduce as they cook, so I'm going to add one more apple. That's the beauty of an apple crisp. You can start with a basic recipe and then adapt it to whatever dish or pan you want to bake it in. So that's almost filled to the brim, but still leaves room for our topping. Now, before we mix up the topping, I am going to sprinkle over this 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, or about a teaspoon of cinnamon, and 1/4 cup of brown sugar. Now I am going to toss this all together, and I'll drizzle over 1/4 cup of molasses. Let's just mix these together. Now I suppose one of the easier ways to do it would have been to mix all this together in a bowl, but then I would have had the bowl to wash. So I really can just mix it together. It doesn't have to be perfect because everything is going to blend together while it bakes anyway. Just want to make sure that it's at least distributed well enough. And finally, I'm going to dab it with a little bit of butter. This is about a tablespoon of butter, and it's just going to give the sauce a little extra richness. Now for the crispy topping, we're going to start with 1/2 cup of butter, and I'm going to melt that. And we're going to put it on the stove over medium. It'll just take a few minutes to melt, or you could melt it in the microwave. But while that's melting, we'll put together the other topping ingredients. 3/4 cup of old-fashioned rolled oats, or you could use quick oats, but not instant oats because they go gluey. And 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and then we're going to do 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. Now you could use gluten-free flour in this if you wanted to, and just remember to choose gluten-free rolled oats as well. Or you could choose whole wheat flour or half whole wheat flour. This topping is really adaptable. There we go. So I'm just going to mix those together. And when the butter is melted, I'll stir that in. Now this is just a basic crispy topping with the flour and the rolled oats, but if you wanted, you could add half a cup of chopped nuts to the topping if you wanted, or seeds. And for the filling, this is all apples that I've chosen, but you could mix in a couple of pears if you'd like as well. If you choose pears, it's nice to add half a teaspoon of ground ginger to the topping. So our butter has melted, and I'm just going to pour it over this mixture. And I'll stir to combine. Sometimes I'll make an apple crisp and I'll actually cut the butter in instead of melting it. But when you melt the butter, it makes the topping even crispier. Just keep stirring until all of the flour and oats are pretty much mixed in. This smells delicious, like a buttery oatmeal cookie. There we go. So all we do is pour the topping over the apples, and then we'll want to spread it evenly. Make sure everything is coated. And into the oven it will go. I preheated the oven to 375. And this will bake for 40 minutes to an hour. It really depends how quickly the apples soften, and you'll know it's done when the filling is bubbling up on the edges. Now for the crustless apple pie, or Swedish apple pie as my mom calls it, and this is my mom's recipe. I love traditional apple pie, but I can't say I'd consider it easy. Not that it's really difficult, but there is pastry to be made and chilled and rolled and crimped. This Swedish apple pie is nothing like that. It's a bit like a dumpling cake actually. You mix the ingredients in a pot, pour them over the apples that you've laid in your pie dish, pour it over the apples and bake. The result is a rich and delicious pie that's really quite effortless. We'll use about 5 apples in this pie. And we're going to slice them into 1/2-inch wedges. I've chosen medium-sized apples, but once again, once we get them in the baking dish, we'll be able to judge if that's enough or too much. So I'll core the apples first, and that'll make it easier to slice them into tidy wedges. I would recommend investing in a good paring knife, a little knife that fits snugly in your hand to make it easy to do these kinds of slicing jobs. Now we're going to slice them into 1/2-inch wedges. So depending on your accuracy with measurements, I can also recommend having a little kitchen measuring tape to help you be able to judge the thickness of cookies when you roll it out, or the thickness of pastry when you roll it out, or the thickness of apples when you slice them. Now let's arrange these in the pie plate. You'll want a 10-inch pie plate, either a deep dish pie plate or one that is at least deep enough to fit the apples. This could also be baked in a casserole dish, a dish like we used for the apple crisp. But when you bake it in a pie plate, it really has a pretty presentation. Now sometimes I kind of just dump the apples in, but sometimes I like to arrange them a little bit so they look tidier when the pie bakes, because they are going to show through the crust. Now I'm going to sprinkle over half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And then I'm going to drizzle over 3 scant tablespoons of molasses. And this will just add a richness to the flavor of the apples. And when I say scant tablespoons, I'm almost filling the tablespoon measure to the top or to the brim. And we can set that aside while we put together our topping ingredients. For the topping, we're going to start with 3/4 of a cup of butter, and we're just going to melt that. You could also melt this in the microwave. And I'm breaking it into a few little pieces just to help it melt faster. Now that our butter is melted, I am going to add to it 1 cup of granulated sugar, I'll stir that in till it's well combined. And then I'm going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I'll just sprinkle that in, stir a bit, sprinkle a bit more in, and stir. And then the final bit from the cup goes in. Now adding the sugar and flour has cooled the butter somewhat. So now I'm going to add 1 large egg that's at room temperature. And I'll stir that well. This smells delicious because there's so much butter in it. Now that the egg is mixed in, I'm adding just 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon, you know what, half a teaspoon actually, of powdered ginger. And I'll just stir until those are well combined. There. And this is a very runny batter, and we're just going to pour it over our apples and then spread it as evenly as possible. There, and it is ready to go in the oven. I preheated the oven to 350 degrees, and this will bake for 45 minutes to an hour. We'll know it's done when the crust is golden and almost a little crisp. Our apple crisp is bubbling away, so I know it's ready. So we'll have to let it cool for a few minutes or several minutes before we serve it. But we still want it to be warm because we're going to serve it with vanilla ice cream, and it's always great when the ice cream gets a little melty with it. If you're in search of easy recipes that showcase fall apples, these are 2 family favorites. An easy apple crisp that goes great with vanilla ice cream, and a rich and buttery crustless apple pie. Still warm from the oven. Enjoy!